A girl cheated on me, completely broke my heart. So I slept with all her friends. I destroyed her entire life and ruined all her relationships. I'll never forget the moment I realized she was cheating on me. It wasn't the typical discovery you see in movies where someone stumbles upon a love letter or a text message. No, it was much colder and more calculated, as if I didn't want to see the obvious. That evening, I returned from a trip. Our basketball team had just won an important match, and I was riding high on that euphoria. Liza, my girlfriend, stayed on campus. She didn't even meet me at the airport. Nothing unusual. She often hung out with her friends. I, on the other hand, was always busy with training and traveling. It had become the norm. When I walked into her room, where we usually spent time together, something felt off. Her phone was on the bed, and the app she always used to track her cycle was open. I didn't know why, but something compelled me to look. I knew she used it to track her dates, just for herself, for peace of mind. But it wasn't strange. What was strange was that I felt it was important to check it now. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I just didn't want to ignore what was right in front of me. My brain started working faster than I could process. I opened her calendar where she marked everything, not only her cycle, but also intimate moments. I saw the red marks, dates when we had unprotected sex. Everything seemed normal, if not for one thing, the black marks. I didn't know what they meant, but something in me shifted. As I scrolled further, my heart stopped. Black marks. Black like a shadow appeared on the days I wasn't around, on the days when I was in other cities, playing games. My fingers froze on the screen, my eyes couldn't tear away. Each black mark on her calendar was a reminder of her secrets. It was horrifying, not just that she cheated on me, but how she did it. Everything was noted, recorded, every little detail. And here I was, processing it. At first, I couldn't grasp what I was seeing. I thought it was a mistake. It couldn't be true. I kept scrolling through the dates, and every time I came across another black mark, I felt my lungs tighten. She'd been regularly cheating on me, with multiple guys over months. This wasn't a one-time thing like she told me when I asked why she'd been distant. This was systematic lying, and all I could do at that moment was sit in her room and stare at the screen. I couldn't believe it, couldn't figure out what to say. It was like a lightning strike. I was stunned, but I couldn't understand how I didn't see this coming. My life, the one I cherished so much, was collapsing in front of me, and I wasn't prepared for it. I stood there, and in my mind, only one question echoed. How do I handle this? How do I react? I had trusted her for so long, and now I was faced with the truth. I wasn't ready for this. My gaze shifted back to the screen, and I saw names. 4 guys, all marked on her calendar with the same pattern of dates when I wasn't around. These were her exes, and probably some new guys she'd been with while I was away. My mind raced, but it couldn't catch up with what I was seeing. I began to scroll through each black mark. Over the course of our relationship, Liza and I didn't have unprotected sex that often, maybe once or twice a month. These marks were attached to the names of guys she'd slept with, 4 guys who she was regularly sleeping with behind my back. I immediately sobered up. I started going through her messages and calls, but didn't find anything suspicious. However, there was a folder on her Android phone with deleted messages where I could still see the numbers. There were thousands of deleted messages and calls, but the numbers were visible, so I quickly checked them on Facebook. One number was from her ex, and 6 others were just random guys. The worst part, I found 2 numbers that belonged to my teammates, and one of them I was really close to. I just put the phone down. There were too many clues. The longer I stared at the screen, the tighter it all became inside me. I felt destroyed. This feeling is indescribable, but anyone who has caught their partner cheating will know exactly what I mean. I felt like a total fool for trusting her, for not suspecting anything. I couldn't stop thinking about how I regretted never cheating, even though I had plenty of opportunities. I felt like an idiot for staying faithful to Liza when I could have done otherwise. I thought my faithfulness was just wasted. I know this sounds stupid, but at the time, it felt like it was the only thing that mattered. I thought, if I had cheated too, it wouldn't hurt this much. In that moment, all I could think about was my pain. I was willing to do anything just to stop feeling this humiliation. I don't know if I was the only one who thought like this when I found out about the betrayal. I'm really curious. I walked out of the apartment and just started wandering aimlessly, not knowing where I was going. I had never experienced emotions like this before, and I didn't know what to do with them. My ego was literally crushed. I didn't know what to do, and I was too ashamed to tell anyone. My sadness quickly turned into rage. I knew I would get revenge. I just didn't know how yet, but I was boiling with anger, and I wanted her to never recover from this. After discovering everything Liza had been hiding, I felt empty. It wasn't just shock. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. But despite all the pain, instead of giving up or dealing with it, I began to plan. I knew I had to do something to regain control. Revenge seemed like the only way, and at that moment, I was sure it would give me solace. I knew I couldn't just forgive her. I couldn't I wasn't ready to forget how she had betrayed me, how she had destroyed everything I believed in. At that moment, I wanted to show her that she couldn't get away with this without consequences. My anger slowly turned into a plan, and I clung to this idea like a lifeline. I realized that revenge would become my goal, my way of restoring my dignity. And though it was foolish at that moment, I truly believed it would give me the feeling I had been longing for. Every detail of her betrayal, every fact from her calendar, each black mark, everything piled up in my mind. I tried to make sense of it, and every thought led to one conclusion: revenge. That was all I wanted. I felt that revenge would give me strength, that it would restore the control I had lost. I thought it was only fair. I started with her friends. Seemed like a logical first step. They were so close to her. I knew that if I slept with them, it would hurt her. She would feel that I was striking at those she cared about, and I would control the situation. Everything around me became just a tool in my game, and I didn't even realize how deeply I was getting into it. I started with one of her friends, the one I knew she spent a lot of time with. I wasn't sure if she would agree, but I decided to give it a try. I thought she would be just a part of my revenge and nothing more. But as soon as we started talking, I realized that with every second, I felt more satisfaction. We flirted, and I couldn't stop. It was the first step, and it gave me a strange sense of power. I knew that through her, I could show Liza that it wasn't all lost, that I could and would act. I felt no shame. It wasn't just about wanting revenge. It was something more. I felt I had power, and that thrilled me. I began planning the next steps. After everything had passed, I kept replaying in my mind what had happened, and I didn't want to stop. I was determined to do everything so that Liza would understand that her actions would have consequences. And every time I met with one of her friends, I thought to myself that now her world was falling apart. I was seeking satisfaction, and every new step brought me closer to it. At first, I didn't notice how I was being pulled into this. It wasn't just revenge. It was total self-destruction. I thought I was in control, but in reality, I was sinking deeper into the abyss. I couldn't stop. I kept sleeping with her friends, not caring about the consequences. I knew it wouldn't last forever. But at that moment, I didn't care. I wasn't just hurting her anymore. I was hurting myself. I didn't notice how quickly I was becoming the thing I hated. Every time I slept with one of her friends, I thought about how she would react. But I didn't feel joy, only numbness. I was slowly turning into something worse than she had ever been. I began to lose touch with reality. The deeper I went into this game, the harder it became to recognize myself. One of the turning points came when, as I expected, the whole team found out. The entire campus knew. The girls I slept with knew exactly what I was doing. They realized that I wasn't with them just for fun. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her to suffer. And I saw how she suffered. She began to notice how everything around her was changing. The distance between her and her friends. Her reputation, the one she had worked so hard to build, was falling apart. But something didn't sit right with me. This didn't bring me any joy. It just made me feel more isolated. I was sinking deeper into chaos. My mind was unraveling, but I continued. I didn't want to think that I was becoming the one I had always despised. The one who ruins lives for the sake of his ego. I knew this wouldn't bring back what I lost. I knew it wouldn't give me the peace I was searching for. But I couldn't stop. I was already too far into it. All I had left was to keep going, to make her feel that she had lost everything. And I didn't realize how deeply I was slipping into this hole. Each day, each moment with another girl, I thought, this is how it should be. But in reality, I was the one who was falling apart. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel freedom. There was only emptiness. Each day became another step in a game that, to me, seemed to give me control. I kept acting without thinking about the consequences, not worrying that it might bring me pain someday. Revenge became my focus, the only meaning I was striving for. I wasn't trying to justify my actions. They seemed perfectly fair to me. Every day started the same way. Alcohol, the bar, friends. It wasn't just a habit anymore. It became my way of existing. I knew I needed to drink to start the day, to stop feeling the constant lump of pain in my chest, to feel alive again. I couldn't afford to let anything distract me from my goal, and revenge was the only thing keeping me afloat. Days went by, and I continued sleeping with her friends, each one becoming part of my plan. It gave me a sense of power, but also a sense of liberation. Every new step, every victory seemed so important, and it was all for me, not for her. It was so I could feel that I hadn't lost everything. I told myself I was doing it for justice, that in this way I was restoring my balance. But in truth, it was my madness, my descent into a void where I lost control. I watched her world collapse, her friends distancing themselves, everyone talking about her relationship with me as if she were just part of some game. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more. I knew she was starting to feel it, but I wanted her to truly understand. I wanted her to feel how it was to lose people, to lose trust. Each night with one of her friends was like another piece of my plan falling into place. I was seeking satisfaction, and every new step brought me closer to it. At first, I didn't notice how I was becoming more absorbed in this process. It wasn't just revenge, it was total self-destruction. I thought I was in control, but in reality, I was sinking deeper into the abyss. I couldn't stop. I kept sleeping with her friends, not caring about the consequences. I knew it wouldn't last forever, but at that moment, I didn't care. I wasn't just hurting her anymore. I was hurting myself. I didn't realize how quickly I was becoming the thing I hated. Every time I slept with one of her friends, I thought about how she would react. But I didn't feel joy, only numbness. I was slowly turning into something worse than she had ever been. I began to lose touch with reality. The deeper I went into this game, the harder it became to recognize myself. One of the turning points came when, as I expected, the whole team found out. The entire campus knew. The girls I slept with knew exactly what I was doing. They realized that I wasn't with them just for fun. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her to suffer, and I saw how she suffered. She began to notice how everything around her was changing. The distance between her and her friends, her reputation, the one she had worked so hard to build, was falling apart. But something didn't sit right with me. This didn't bring me any joy. It just made me feel more isolated. I was sinking deeper into chaos. My mind was unraveling, but I continued. I didn't want to think that I was becoming the one I had always despised, the one who ruins lives for the sake of his ego. I knew this wouldn't bring back what I lost. I knew it wouldn't give me the peace I was searching for, but I couldn't stop. I was already too far into it. All I had left was to keep going, to make her feel that she had lost everything, and I didn't realize how deeply I was slipping into this hole. Each day, each moment with another girl, I thought, this is how it should be. But in reality, I was the one who was falling apart. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel freedom. There was only emptiness. With each passing day, revenge became more consuming. I was losing control, but I liked it. I became more absorbed in the game, unaware that I had already crossed a line. Every new step seemed more justified, but in truth, it was Liza who was suffering. I could see her world collapsing, and despite the fact that I needed to continue, I began to notice how she was changing, how her life was starting to fall apart. At first, her reactions weren't immediately obvious. She tried to hide the pain, as if everything was fine. But I knew something wasn't right. Everything I was doing, every distance she was creating from her friends, every conflict she was going through was a consequence of my actions. She could no longer find support, even from those she considered close. Her friends, the ones she used to share everything with, started distancing themselves. She didn't understand what was happening. This was my revenge, and she was beginning to feel its effects on herself. But the reason her friends and loved ones started distancing themselves wasn't just because I slept with her friends. It was because this entire situation was fundamentally changing her behavior. People started noticing that she had become distant, anxious, and overly withdrawn. All of this behavior stemmed from the stress and turmoil I had introduced into her life. As soon as her friends and acquaintances started seeing how she was losing her confidence, how her life was falling apart, they started perceiving her as someone who couldn't control her own life. They saw that Liza was changing. She was no longer the girl they could have fun with. Every step she took became careful, as though she was afraid of something. Even those who had been her closest friends began to pull away. But not because of what I had done with her friends, but because her behavior had become unbearable to be around. She couldn't communicate normally. Her constant worries were affecting her mood and how she interacted with people. Liza had become more closed off, slower to respond to offers of help or sympathy. It began with her closest friends. They couldn't understand why she had started reacting this way to everything, why she became so withdrawn. They saw her life falling apart but didn't understand why. Slowly, they began to distance themselves. Liza had become a mystery to everyone, and the more she tried to hide her pain, the more it seemed like she couldn't be around them anymore. She wasn't the same person she had been before. People began to notice her oddness, her nervousness, as though she had been detached from everything happening around her. And at that moment, her friends began to feel that Liza was losing herself. They started distancing themselves. When I saw her at a party sitting alone in the corner, trying to hide her tears, I realized that my revenge had already become more than just breaking her. It was breaking her connections to the world, to the people she cared about. She couldn't go back to the circle she had once had. People started noticing her odd behavior, her nervousness, as if she was detached from everything happening around her. The most terrifying thing was seeing how her closest friends began to pull away. Even her parents started asking what was wrong with her, why she had become so withdrawn and distant. It wasn't just a game anymore. It had become a real tragedy for her. I wasn't just hurting her by sleeping with her friends, I was destroying her personality, her life. My revenge was affecting not just her relationships with people, but also her own perception of the world. I knew she couldn't stop herself from this cycle of fear and alienation, that her friends were no longer the ones who supported her. But I didn't care. I wanted her to feel what it was like to lose everything. I saw her world falling apart, and I kept going. Revenge continued to spread like a wildfire, consuming everything around me. But I still didn't realize that I had already become part of this fire. Everything I was doing, every new step in destroying her life, was starting to leave me hollow. I no longer felt satisfaction from my revenge. The feeling I had expected, that I had restored justice, faded. Instead, each new action became just a reflection of how I was losing myself. With revenge, I was losing my humanity, but I kept walking down this path as though it had some kind of meaning. I became more immersed in alcohol. It was my friend, my shelter from the thoughts that were consuming me. I could no longer face those who had once been part of my life because they looked at me with pity, and I couldn't accept that. It was hard for me to look at them because I knew I wasn't the same person I once was. I just tried not to notice the emptiness inside me. But despite trying to hide my pain, I increasingly felt it growing. When I saw Liza, when I saw her continue to suffer, I couldn't help but think about how we had once been happy together. Her face filled with pain, her tears as she tried to find answers. It all seemed like one big blow to my pride. She couldn't understand what was happening, and I saw that. But I had driven her to this. I started to wonder, do I really want to see her like this? I remembered our first meeting when everything was easy and natural. Back then, I couldn't have imagined a situation where I would take pleasure in her suffering. That feeling of watching her lose everything that was important to her suddenly felt foreign. I realized that revenge didn't give me what I expected. It didn't bring me relief or peace. Each day became a struggle with my own thoughts. I tried to tell myself that Liza deserved everything that was happening to her. But every time I thought about it, it became harder to convince myself. I felt like I could never get back to the moment when we were happy. Everything I had done was breaking both her and me at the same time. Revenge wasn't restoring justice, I was destroying. From time to time when I was alone, I felt how she still had an effect on me. I tried to find comfort in alcohol, in people, in distractions, but inside it was empty. This wasn't what I had expected. I began to understand that the revenge I had been living for was actually just masking my own emptiness. I had spent my energy, my time, destroying her life, but in the end, I was destroying myself too. There were moments when I wanted to stop, when I thought about what would happen if I just let go of this situation, but in those moments, revenge would grab me again, like a whirlwind. I didn't know how to stop. Voices in my head would say, "You can't give up. You have to keep going." You're right, but I started to doubt that this was true. I began to feel that I no longer had control over this game, that it was beyond my reach. With revenge, I wasn't just destroying her, I was destroying myself. I realized that as she started suffering, as I destroyed her world, I was also destroying my own life. I was no longer the person I had once been. I couldn't find the strength to bring back anything good that we had shared. I kept remembering how easy and joyful things had been when we were together. But was that real? Or was I just now clinging to something I couldn't change anymore? My life continued to be consumed by revenge. I was drowning in this process that, to me, seemed to give me control. But the further I went, the clearer it became that revenge was not only not bringing me satisfaction, it was becoming my prison. Every morning I woke up to continue this path, but at some point, there was nothing joyful about it anymore. I no longer felt powerful. I felt like I was being consumed by the process I had started. Every night I returned home as if to avoid. No real emotions, only coldness. I thought that revenge would bring me peace, the moment when I'd finally feel that it no longer hurt. But all of this was an illusion. I thought I was getting what I deserved, but in reality, I was losing myself in this madness. The more I tried to hurt her, the more I lost my soul. I kept drinking, more and more often. Alcohol became my way of escaping, my shelter that I sought every night. But the more I drank, the less of the old me remained. I started to realize that this wasn't just about revenge. It had become my way of living. I couldn't stop. I was sinking deeper into this fog, not noticing how it was swallowing everything around me. Liza kept suffering, but I didn't care anymore. Or rather, I convinced myself that I didn't care. She was losing her friends, losing her place in this world, and I saw how she changed. Her once bright life, full of possibilities, turned into a struggle with her own demons. I knew she was supposed to realize her guilt, but at the same time, I saw her slowly break down. It was tormenting, watching her lose everything, but at some point, I started doubting whether revenge would really bring me satisfaction. She had become someone else. She no longer had friends, her family was distancing themselves, and her surroundings had turned cold and foreign. She no longer interacted with the people she had once shared joy with. Her life turned into loneliness, and I couldn't understand why that didn't bring me relief. This wasn't what I had expected. By seeking revenge, I was destroying her, but I was also destroying myself, and I couldn't stop. Every time I saw her, when I met her gaze, I felt that none of this was giving me what I had been searching for. I tried to convince myself that this was normal, that she deserved it. But each time our eyes met, I felt something twist inside. There was no rage, no anger in her eyes, only pain and despair. I realized that I was the cause of that pain, but I couldn't let go of what I was doing. Her world was falling apart. I saw how she was losing herself, but at some point this didn't bring me that feeling of victory I had been looking for. In her eyes, I started to see not an enemy, but someone who had once been close to me. That look, full of despair, no longer filled me with anger. I started realizing that revenge, the thing I had been striving for, wouldn't give me anything but emptiness. It was destroying both of us. And then I understood that I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue this path because, despite all my efforts, I wasn't getting what I had expected. I thought revenge would bring me satisfaction, that I would be stronger when I saw her suffer. But in reality, I had become a lost person, destroying myself to hurt someone else. Everything became gray and empty. I had lost myself in this revenge, and all that remained was the realization that revenge wouldn't bring back what I had lost. I couldn't get back what we once had, but I didn't know how to stop. Every morning, waking up with a hangover, I kept asking myself the same question. How did I end up here? There was a strange emptiness in my mind. Everything I once wanted now seemed meaningless. I thought revenge would restore justice, but instead, it was destroying me. I began to realize that my life no longer had meaning. I was living only to cause pain, but that pain wasn't bringing me relief. I was alone. There were no people around me that I could talk to, people I valued. I had lost friends. I had lost faith in myself. Through revenge, I destroyed everything I had. When I met her gaze, I no longer felt the victory I once did. All I saw was her pain, and that pain started to return to me. I kept drinking, but it didn't help anymore. I tried to numb my feelings, but they only grew stronger. Liza was shattered. I saw how her life was losing meaning with each passing day. She had lost the people she loved, and she began to isolate herself. And in that moment, as I watched her loneliness, I suddenly realized that I was also alone. I no longer felt that anything in life was worth fighting for. I couldn't go back. I saw how she was breaking down, and I understood that I was the cause of her fear and pain. I started wondering what would have happened if I had acted differently, but the thought of it terrified me. I couldn't just stop. Revenge had become my only purpose, and I didn't know what to do with myself if I stopped. I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my actions. I was consumed by this emptiness. Every morning started the same. I would sober up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living only to cause pain. I was losing myself, and it didn't bring me satisfaction. I tried to find comfort in alcohol, in nighttime adventures, in new acquaintances, but every time I woke up, I felt that deep emptiness inside again. I saw how Liza was losing everyone she had once considered close. But I couldn't stop. Revenge kept driving me forward. Time passed, and I saw how her world was falling apart. She was no longer the girl I had known. She had become someone else, someone consumed by fear and despair. Her face had grown dull, her eyes empty. But still, despite her suffering, I kept going. I didn't know how to stop. Revenge was what I sought for relief, but in the end, it only brought emptiness. Every day I tried to justify myself, convincing myself that all of this happened because of her. If she hadn't cheated on me, I would still be that same kind, good man I once was. I would have kept living, enjoying life, being the man everyone loved. But that thought didn't matter. I wasn't that person anymore. My revenge had taken me. I couldn't justify myself anymore because everything I was doing couldn't bring back the life I had lost. I wasn't kind. I had become the very person I had once hated. And despite my excuses, I knew that revenge wouldn't return what was gone. But at some point, it didn't bring me the victory I had been seeking anymore. I no longer felt that satisfaction I had felt before. This feeling of revenge, which I had sought for so long, had become a burden. But still, I continued. I couldn't stop because I didn't know what would happen if I did. My feelings became strange. I was completely consumed by what was happening around Liza. But at some point, I realized that I was losing not only her, but myself as well. I had become a shadow of myself. And in that moment, when I understood that I no longer existed, I realized that revenge wouldn't save me. It would destroy everything that was good in my life. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. Every day felt like a new step into the abyss. I didn't feel alive anymore. I kept drinking, kept seeing other girls, but every time I saw her, I felt it more and more. Something inside me was rotting. I was sinking into this, like quicksand, not knowing how to get out. I kept telling myself it was all for a reason. That revenge was what was needed to restore justice. That once I destroyed her, I would finally feel relief. But that never happened. Revenge didn't give me strength, but it was destroying me. I wasn't the person I was before, and I couldn't find the strength to be that person anymore. I had lost myself, and I couldn't do anything about it. I would recall the moments when we were together, when everything was simple and clear. I didn't have to prove anything. We were just together. But now I had become someone else. Through revenge, I destroyed everything that was. And no matter how much I tried to justify it to myself, I understood I couldn't get anything back. I couldn't return her, nor the life we once shared. My environment became emptier. My friends started distancing themselves. I stopped maintaining normal relationships with people. All that was left was regret and emptiness. Even the world I had tried to create around me had become unbearably heavy. I was surrounded by loneliness, even when I was in company. I had no one to talk to, no one who supported me. And so, I found myself standing at a crossroads, not knowing what to do. Revenge could no longer be my goal. I didn't know how to move forward. I couldn't keep doing this endlessly. I felt the space around me grow darker, and I was drifting further from what was once important to me. I decided I had to stop. But how do you stop when you're already this deep in? My life had become a battle with my own demons. I knew that if I kept going, I would not only destroy her life, but also my own. I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my actions, but deep down, I knew I had to stop, or I would lose everything. I could no longer continue without knowing what to do next. I realized I couldn't go back, but I needed to take at least one step forward to start over. And that step was difficult because it meant admitting my mistake and realizing that revenge hadn't brought me anything but pain. I didn't want to acknowledge this, but maybe it was the only way to return to myself. I was finally ready to face myself. Not as the person who had destroyed everything, but as someone who understood that revenge doesn't solve problems. It only creates new ones. And maybe this was my first step towards healing, understanding that I couldn't live in the past anymore, that revenge wouldn't bring me back to who I once was. But at that moment, I realized it was already too late. I had lost so much, and I couldn't get back what was once important. I began to realize that perhaps I would never be able to fix everything,